Isabella Cruz never expected that caring for a baby would destroy her carefully constructed lies. When Alessandro DeLuca, the most feared man in Chicago, walked into his family's nursery and saw those unmistakable emerald eyes staring back at him from the child she was holding, her world began to crumble. 3 years of secrets. 3 years of pretending this baby belonged to someone else. 3 years of hoping Alessandro would never discover the truth about that one passionate night that changed everything. But now he knew, and the fury burning in his gaze promised that her deception would cost her more than she ever imagined. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The DeLuca mansion stood like a fortress against the Chicago skyline, its imposing stone facade hiding secrets darker than the storm clouds gathering overhead. Isabella Cruz clutched her worn leather purse tighter as she approached the massive oak doors, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step on the marble pathway. The job advertisement had been vague, typical for wealthy families who valued their privacy above all else, but the salary offered was generous enough to save her family's struggling restaurant and keep her younger brother in POF. College. She had no idea she was walking into the lion's den, no idea that behind these walls lived the man whose memory haunted her dreams and whose child she had been raising in secret for the past 2 years. The housekeeper, Mrs. Romano, answered the door with a warm smile that immediately put Isabella at ease. "You must be Miss Cruz. Mr. DeLuca, Marco that is, has been eagerly awaiting your arrival. He's quite worried about finding the right person to care for little Sophia." Isabella followed the elderly woman through corridors lined with priceless artwork and family photographs, her shoes clicking softly against the polished marble floors. The opulence surrounding her was overwhelming, a stark contrast to her modest apartment in Little Italy, where she had been caring for Sophia since the day she was born. "The position requires complete discretion," Mrs. Romano explained as they walked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The family has many business associates who prefer their privacy. You understand, of course." Isabella nodded, though a chill ran down her spine. She had heard whispers about the DeLuca family, rumors that followed them like shadows through the streets of Chicago. But desperation had a way of silencing fears, and her family's mounting debts left her with few choices. Marco DeLuca was waiting in the sitting room, bouncing a fussy baby on his knee, while pacing back and forth across expensive Persian rugs. He looked up when Isabella entered, relief flooding his features as he took in her appearance. She was exactly what he had hoped for, professional yet warm, with the kind of gentle demeanor that would be perfect for his daughter. "Miss Cruz, thank God you're here," Marco said, immediately thrusting the crying infant toward her. "Sophia has been inconsolable all morning, and I have an important meeting in an hour. I don't know what I'm doing wrong." Isabella accepted the baby with practiced ease, her heart clenching as she looked down into the familiar face. Sophia had grown so much in the 2 weeks since Isabella had last seen her, her dark hair longer now, her cheeks fuller. But those eyes, those distinctive green eyes that could only belong to one man, remained exactly the same. "Shh, mi amor," Isabella whispered, settling into the natural rhythm of soothing a distressed child. She began to rock Sophia gently, humming a soft lullaby her own mother had sung to her years ago. Within minutes, the crying subsided, replaced by contented gurgling, as Sophia snuggled against Isabella's shoulder. Marco stared in amazement. "How did you do that? I've been trying for hours." "Babies can sense anxiety," Isabella explained, carefully avoiding his gaze. "They respond to calm energy. Sophia just needed to feel safe." As she spoke, Isabella's mind raced with the implications of what she was doing. Taking this job meant being in the same house where Alessandro might appear at any moment, meant living a lie so complex it could destroy everything she had worked to protect. But looking down at Sophia, at the child who should have been hers to raise openly, she knew she couldn't walk away. "You're hired," Marco said without hesitation. "When can you start?" "Immediately, if you need me to." Relief washed over Marco's face as he gathered his briefcase and jacket. "Mrs. Romano will show you to your room and explain Sophia's routine. I should be back by dinner, but if Alessandro, my brother, stops by before then." Just tell him you're the new nanny. He doesn't usually involve himself with household matters, but he's been protective since Sofia was born. Isabella's blood turned to ice at the mention of Alessandro's name. She managed a weak nod, praying her voice would remain steady. Of course, Mr. DeLuca. Is there anything specific I should know about your brother's preferences regarding Sofia's care? Marco paused at the door, something flickering across his features. Just be careful around him, Miss Cruz. Alessandro can be intense, especially when it comes to family. He's not like other men. After Marco left, Isabella spent the afternoon acquainting herself with the mansion's layout while caring for Sofia. The baby seemed to remember her despite their brief separation, reaching for Isabella's face with tiny fingers and babbling happily as they explored the luxurious nursery that had been prepared with every possible comfort. The room was a study in understated elegance, with soft green walls adorned with hand-painted murals of fairy tale scenes. An antique rocking chair sat by tall windows that offered a view of the manicured gardens below, and built-in shelves held an impressive collection of children's books in multiple languages. Everything spoke of wealth and careful preparation, the kind of environment where a child could want for nothing. Yet as Isabella changed Sofia's diaper and prepared her afternoon bottle, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in a house of cards that could collapse at any moment. The weight of her deception pressed down on her shoulders, like a physical burden, made heavier by the knowledge that every moment she spent with Sofia was both a gift and a terrible risk. She had been feeding Sofia in the nursery when she heard the front door slam shut with enough force to rattle the windows. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor below, accompanied by the sound of raised voices. Mrs. Romano's nervous tone was followed by a deeper, more commanding voice that made Isabella's heart stop beating entirely. Alessandro was home. Isabella's hands trembled as she lifted Sofia to her shoulder for burping, trying to calm her nerves before the inevitable confrontation. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, but now that it was happening, she felt completely unprepared to face the man who had unknowingly fathered her child. The footsteps grew closer, climbing the stairs with purposeful strides. Isabella closed her eyes and took a deep breath, reminding herself of the story she had carefully constructed. She was Isabella Cruz, a nanny from a reputable agency. She knew nothing about the DeLuca family's business dealings. She had never met Alessandro DeLuca before in her life. The nursery door opened without a knock, and Alessandro DeLuca stepped inside with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. 3 years had passed since that night, but he looked exactly as Isabella remembered. Tall and imposing with dark hair that was slightly longer now, touching the collar of his expensive suit. His presence filled the room like a storm cloud, bringing with it an undercurrent of danger that made the air seem thicker. His dark eyes swept the room, taking in every detail with the sharp focus of a predator assessing its territory. When his gaze finally settled on Isabella, she felt the impact like a physical blow. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire ready to snap. "You're the new nanny," Alessandro said finally, his voice carrying the slight Italian accent that had once made her weak in the knees. It wasn't a question but a statement of fact, delivered with the authority of someone accustomed to having all the answers before asking the questions. "Yes, sir." Isabella Cruz. She managed to keep her voice steady despite the chaos erupting in her chest. "Your brother hired me this afternoon." Alessandro stepped closer, and Isabella caught the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something darker, more dangerous. He moved with the fluid grace of a man comfortable with violence, each step calculated and precise. When he was close enough to touch, he stopped, his attention shifting to the baby in Isabella's arms. That's when everything changed. Alessandro's expression transformed the moment he looked at Sofia, his features shifting from mild curiosity to sharp recognition. Isabella watched in horror as his eyes widened, taking in the baby's distinctive green eyes, the same unusual shade that had made Alessandro so memorable during their brief encounter years ago. The color drained from his face as he stared at Sofia, his gaze moving from her eyes to her nose, her mouth, searching for other familiar features. Isabella could practically see his mind working, calculating dates and possibilities, connecting dots that should have remained forever scattered. "Cazzo," he breathed, the Italian curse falling from his lips like a prayer. His hand reached out involuntarily towards Sophia, before stopping just inches from her face. When was she born? Isabella's mouth went dry. She had prepared for many scenarios, but not for this immediate recognition. Not for the way Alessandro was looking at Sophia like he was seeing a ghost. I don't understand what you're asking, Mr. DeLuca. The date. Alessandro's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. When was this baby born? Isabella's mind raced through possible responses, all of them inadequate. She could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool temperature of the room. I believe Mr. DeLuca said she was born in March 15th. Alessandro's jaw clenched as he did the mental math, his face growing darker with each passing second. March 15th would put Sophia's conception sometime in late June, early July of the previous year. Isabella watched the realization dawn in his eyes like sunrise over a battlefield, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. March 15th, he repeated slowly, his voice carrying a new edge that made Isabella's blood run cold. That would make her almost 2 years old. Yes, sir. Alessandro stepped even closer, close enough that Isabella could feel the heat radiating from his body. His presence was overwhelming, predatory in a way that reminded her exactly why people feared the DeLuca name. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout. Look at me. Isabella forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to run. His eyes were the same striking green as Sophia's, a color so unusual it couldn't possibly be a coincidence. Up close, she could see the intelligence burning behind those eyes, the sharp mind that had built an empire from nothing and eliminated anyone foolish enough to stand in his way. I know you, Alessandro said softly, his words falling between them like stones into still water. I know that face, that voice. Hotel Monaco, summer of 2022. The charity gala for the Children's Hospital. Isabella's carefully constructed composure began to crack. The memory came flooding back against her will. The elegant ballroom, the champagne flowing like water, the way Alessandro had appeared at her side like something out of a dream. She had been working as a server that night, trying to make extra money to help with her family's expenses. She wasn't supposed to be mingling with the guests, wasn't supposed to accept his invitation to dance, wasn't supposed to let him sweep her away to his penthouse apartment, where they had spent one incredible night together before reality crashed back down around them. I don't know what you're talking about, she lied, but her voice betrayed her with a slight tremor. Alessandro's smile was sharp as a blade. Don't insult my intelligence, Isabella. I remember everything about that night. Your laugh, the way you felt in my arms, the sound you made when I... He paused, his eyes flicking to Sophia before returning to Isabella's face. And now here you are, in my brother's house, taking care of a baby with my eyes. The accusation hung between them like a loaded gun. Isabella felt Sophia stirring in her arms, the baby sensing the tension even in her sleep. She forced herself to take a steadying breath, knowing that everything depended on her next words. She's your brother's daughter, Isabella said quietly. Marco's daughter. Is she? Alessandro reached out and gently touched Sophia's tiny hand, his expression softening for just a moment before hardening again. Because Marco has brown eyes, just like our parents, just like everyone else in the DeLuca family, except for me. I inherited these from my grandmother, La Nonna Elena. They say I'm the first person in 3 generations to have her eyes. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs as Alessandro's fingers traced Sophia's face with surprising gentleness. The contrast between his tender touch and the danger radiating from him was almost unbearable. Yet here's this beautiful baby, Alessandro continued, his voice deceptively calm, living in my brother's house, with eyes exactly like mine. Tell me, Isabella, what are the odds of such a coincidence? Before Isabella could respond, Sophia woke up and began to fuss, her small face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. Without thinking, Isabella began to rock her gently, whispering soothing words in Spanish that came naturally after years of caring for her nieces and nephews. Alessandro watched this interaction with laser focus, noting the way Sophia calmed immediately at Isabella's voice, the obvious bond between them that went deeper than a simple employer-nanny relationship. His suspicions solidified into certainty as he observed the natural, practiced way Isabella cared for the child. "How long have you known her?" Alessandro asked suddenly. "I just met her today when your brother hired me." "Try again." The words came out like a whip crack. "And this time, don't lie to me." Isabella's composure finally shattered under the weight of his scrutiny. She clutched Sofia closer, her maternal instincts overriding her fear as she realized the game was up. There would be no more hiding, no more pretending. Alessandro DeLuca, one of the most powerful men in Chicago, had just discovered that the baby girl he was staring at with such intensity was his own daughter. "Please," Isabella whispered, tears beginning to gather in her eyes. "Don't take her away from me." The admission hung in the air between them like a confession, confirming everything Alessandro had suspected. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, hurt, before settling into the cold mask that had made him legendary in both legitimate business circles and the darker corners of Chicago's underworld. "So, it's true," he said quietly. "Sofia is mine." Isabella nodded, unable to find words that could possibly explain the magnitude of what she had done. How could she tell him about the pregnancy test that had turned her world upside down? About the sleepless nights wondering whether to contact him? About the decision to keep Sofia's existence a secret to protect her from the dangerous world Alessandro inhabited? 3 years, Alessandro continued, his voice growing harder with each word. 3 years you've kept my daughter from me. 3 years of lies. "I was protecting her," Isabella said desperately. "Your world, your life, it's dangerous. I didn't want her to grow up surrounded by violence." Alessandro's laugh was cold and bitter. "So, instead, you gave her to my brother, let her grow up in the same house, the same family, just without knowing who her real father was. How exactly does that protect her?" Isabella realized the flaw in her logic too late. By allowing Marco to believe Sofia was his daughter, she had ensured the child would still be part of the DeLuca world, still be exposed to the same dangers she had tried to shield her from. The only difference was that Sofia would have grown up never knowing her true parentage, never understanding why she looked so different from the man she called father. "I made a mistake," Isabella admitted, her voice breaking. "I was young and scared and I didn't know what else to do. When I found out I was pregnant, you had already disappeared. I didn't even know your last name until I saw it in the newspapers." Alessandro's expression darkened further. "You could have found me if you had wanted to. The DeLuca name isn't exactly unknown in this city." "And then what?" Isabella's fear began to transform into desperation, the fierce protectiveness of a mother whose child was threatened. "Should I have shown up at your door with a baby and demanded you acknowledge her? Should I have tried to force my way into your world with no protection, no understanding of how dangerous it could be? You should have told me I had a daughter." Alessandro's controlled facade finally cracked, his voice rising with the force of his anger. "You should have given me the choice to decide what kind of father I wanted to be." Sofia began to cry at the sound of raised voices, her small face turning red with distress. Isabella immediately began to soothe her, bouncing gently while whispering reassurances, but the damage was done. The baby's cries seemed to echo the pain and confusion that had suddenly erupted in the elegant nursery. Alessandro stared at his daughter, at the child he had never known existed until minutes ago, and something in his expression shifted. The anger was still there, burning bright and dangerous, but underneath it, Isabella could see something else, a longing so deep it took her breath away. "Let me hold her," Alessandro said quietly. Isabella's arms tightened instinctively around Sofia. "I don't think that's a good idea right now. She's upset. She's upset because strangers are fighting over her," Alessandro pointed out with brutal logic. "I'm not a stranger. I'm her father." The word hung between them, heavy with implications and unspoken promises. Isabella looked into Alessandro's eyes and saw not the cold mafia boss the world feared, but a man who had just discovered he was a father, who was looking at his child for the first time with a mixture of wonder and desperate need. Slowly, carefully, Isabella transferred Sofia into Alessandro's waiting arms. The baby continued to fuss for a moment before something in her father's scent or voice calmed her. She blinked up at him with those distinctive green eyes, and Isabella watched Alessandro's entire world rearrange itself around this small person he had never expected to exist. Bella bambina, Alessandro murmured in Italian, his voice soft with wonder. My beautiful little girl. For a moment, the room was filled with an almost sacred quiet as father and daughter looked at each other for the first time. Isabella felt her heart breaking and healing simultaneously as she watched the man she had never stopped thinking about hold the child she had loved from the moment of conception. But the peace was shattered when Marco's voice echoed up the stairs, calling for Isabella. Footsteps approached the nursery, and all three adults in the room realized that the easy part of this confrontation was over. Now, they would have to deal with the aftermath, the explanations, the way this revelation would ripple through the carefully ordered world Marco thought he understood. Isabella? Marco called as he reached the nursery door. How did Sofia do this afternoon? I hope she wasn't too much trouble for... Marco's words died in his throat as he took in the scene before him. His brother Alessandro, holding the baby Marco, had believed was his own daughter, Isabella standing nearby with tears streaming down her face, and an atmosphere so charged with tension it was almost visible. What's going on here? Marco asked slowly, though Isabella could see the pieces clicking together in his mind as he looked from Sofia to Alessandro and back again. Alessandro turned to face his younger brother, still cradling Sofia against his chest. Marco, we need to talk. Is she... Marco couldn't finish the question, but he didn't need to. The truth was written across Alessandro's face, in the way he held Sofia, in the protective stance he had unconsciously adopted. Yes, Alessandro said simply. Sofia is my daughter. Marco staggered backward, as if he had been physically struck. His face went through a rainbow of emotions, confusion, betrayal, hurt, anger, before settling into an expression of profound loss. Isabella realized with a sinking heart that Marco had genuinely believed Sofia was his child, had bonded with her over the past 2 years, had planned a future around being her father. How is that possible? Marco whispered. Her mother said, she told me, her mother is standing right here, Alessandro said, his voice carrying a warning edge as he looked at Isabella. And she has some explaining to do. Isabella felt the weight of both brothers' stares and wanted nothing more than to disappear. She had created this situation through her choices and her lies, and now she had to face the consequences. But looking at Sofia, safe in her father's arms, she couldn't bring herself to regret keeping her child safe, even if her methods had been flawed. Marco, Isabella began, but her voice caught. She cleared her throat and tried again. I'm sorry, I never meant for things to get this complicated. Complicated? Marco's voice rose with incredulous anger. You let me believe I had a daughter. You let me fall in love with her, plan my life around her, and all this time she belonged to someone else? She belonged to me, Isabella shocked back, her own anger finally surfacing. I carried her. I gave birth to her. I've taken care of her every day of her life. I made the best decision I could with the information I had. By lying to everyone involved, Alessandro's voice was dangerously quiet. By denying me the chance to know my own child? By keeping her safe? Isabella's voice cracked with emotion. Do you have any idea what it's like to be a pregnant woman with no support, no family money, facing the possibility of raising a child alone? I did what I thought was best for Sofia. And what about me? Marco demanded. What about what was best for me? Did you even consider how this would affect me when the truth came out? Isabella's shoulders sagged under the weight of guilt and exhaustion. She had spent 2 years living with the consequences of her decision, watching Marco bond with Sofia, while knowing that every moment of happiness was built on a foundation of lies. She had told herself it was temporary, that eventually she would find a way to tell the truth. But there had never seemed to be a right time, a safe time, a time when revealing Sofia's paternity wouldn't destroy everything. I considered it, she said quietly. But I also considered what would happen to Sofia if she grew up in a world where people might use her to get to her father, where she might become a target because of her last name. I wanted her to have a normal childhood. Alessandro made a sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so bitter. Normal? You think growing up as Marco's daughter would have been normal? You think being part of this family, living in this house, would have kept her away from my world? Isabella realized he was right, of course. The DeLuca family was the DeLuca family, regardless of which brother claimed paternity. Sofia would have grown up surrounded by the same security, the same careful protocols, the same underlying awareness that their world was different from other people's. The only difference would have been knowing her true father from the beginning. I was afraid, Isabella admitted finally, the words torn from her throat by exhaustion and despair. I was afraid you wouldn't want her, or that you would take her away from me completely. I was afraid of your world and what it might do to an innocent child. So I took the coward's way out and let Marco believe she was his, because I knew he would love her and keep her safe. And you never stopped to think that I might love her too? Alessandro's voice was soft but deadly. You never considered that I might want to be a father to my own child. Isabella looked at him holding Sofia, but the way his entire posture had changed the moment she was placed in his arms, and felt a fresh wave of guilt crash over her. She had made assumptions about Alessandro based on his reputation, on the stories whispered about him in the streets of Chicago. She had never given him the chance to prove those assumptions wrong. I see it now, she whispered. I see that I was wrong about so many things. Marco had been listening to this exchange with growing agitation, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. This is all very touching, he said bitterly. The what happens now? Do I just pretend the last 2 years didn't happen? Do I walk away from the child I thought was my daughter and act like my heart isn't breaking? Alessandro looked at his brother with something that might have been sympathy if it weren't mixed with so much steel. Now we figure out how to move forward. Sofia is my daughter, Marco. That's not negotiable. But you've been part of her life, and that matters too. Does it? Marco asked desperately. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm about to lose everything that mattered to me. Isabella felt her heart breaking for Marco, for the man who had unknowingly stepped into the role of father and played it with such love and dedication. She had created this situation, had allowed him to believe in a future that was built on lies, and now that future was crumbling around him. Marco, she began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. No, I don't want to hear any more excuses or explanations. I need some time to process this. He looked at Sofia one last time, his expression full of longing and loss. I need some air. Marco left the nursery without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded into silence. Isabella and Alessandro were left alone with Sofia, who had begun to fuss again in response to the tension filling the room. She needs to be fed, Isabella said quietly, reaching for the baby. Her bottle should be ready downstairs. Alessandro hesitated for a moment before handing Sofia back to Isabella, though his reluctance was obvious. We're not finished with this conversation. I know. Isabella settled Sofia in her arms and headed toward the door, but Alessandro's voice stopped her. Isabella. When she turned back, his green eyes were burning with intensity. I want a DNA test. Official confirmation. Isabella nodded, having expected this demand. Of course. And I want the truth. All of it. No more lies. No more half explanations. I want to know everything that happened from the moment you left my apartment that night until the moment I walked into this room. Today. Isabella swallowed hard. The full truth was more complicated than Alessandro could possibly imagine, involving decisions and circumstances that painted her in an even worse light than he already believed. But she owed him honesty, even if it destroyed whatever small sympathy he might have for her situation. Okay, she agreed quietly. After I feed Sofia, we'll talk. Alessandro nodded curtly and stepped aside to let her pass. As Isabella walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, she could feel his eyes following her every step, could sense the mixture of anger and hunger in his gaze that reminded her uncomfortably of the night they had created. Sofia, together. The kitchen was blessedly empty when Isabella arrived, Mrs. Romano having apparently retreated to her own quarters to avoid the family drama unfolding upstairs. Isabella warmed Sophia's bottle with practiced efficiency, while trying to organize her thoughts for the conversation to come. How could she explain the impossible position she had found herself in, the choices she had made out of love and fear and desperation? Sophia drank her bottle with the contentment of a well-cared-for child, blissfully unaware that her world had just been turned upside down. Isabella found herself studying the baby's face with new eyes, looking for traces of Alessandro that she had trained herself not to see over the past 2 years. The shape of Sophia's nose, the stubborn set of her jaw when she was displeased, even the way she moved her hands while drinking, all carried echoes of her father. "She looks like you when she's concentrating." Alessandro's voice came from the kitchen doorway, startling Isabella from her observations. Isabella looked up to find him watching them both with an expression that was difficult to read. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but there was something else now, a wonder and possessiveness that made Isabella's stomach flutter with nervousness. "People always said she had unusual eyes," Isabella replied carefully. "I told them she got them from her grandfather." Alessandro moved closer, his presence filling the large kitchen the same way it had dominated the nursery. "And when she gets older? When people start asking questions about why she doesn't look like Marco?" Isabella had worried about this inevitability for months, knowing that Sophia's distinctive features would become more pronounced as she grew. I hoped that by then I would have figured out a better solution." "A better solution than telling the truth?" Isabella finished feeding Sophia and lifted her to her shoulder for burping, using the familiar routine to buy herself time to formulate an answer. The truth seemed too dangerous, too complicated. More complicated than this? Alessandro gestured around them, encompassing the chaos they now found themselves in. "More complicated than letting my brother believe he was raising my child while I remained completely ignorant of her existence?" Isabella couldn't argue with his logic. Her careful plans had ultimately created a situation far worse than anything that might have resulted from honesty. "You're right. I see that now." Alessandro pulled out a chair at the kitchen island and sat down, his eyes never leaving Sophia. "Tell me about the pregnancy. Tell me about her birth. Tell me about every moment I missed because of your lies." The words were harsh, but Isabella could hear the pain beneath them, the grief of a man who had discovered he had lost 2 years of his daughter's life. She settled into the chair across from him, Sophia now content and sleepy in her arms, and began the story she had never thought she would tell. "I found out I was pregnant 6 weeks after that night," Isabella began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was working 2 jobs, trying to save money for nursing school, living in a tiny studio apartment in Little Italy. When the test came back positive, I didn't know what to do." Alessandro listened intently, his jaw tight as Isabella described the morning sickness that had made it impossible to keep down the cheap food she could afford. The way she had to quit her job as a server because the smell of restaurant food made her violently ill, the gradual depletion of her savings as medical bills mounted. "I looked you up online," Isabella continued, watching Alessandro's eyebrows rise in surprise. "I found articles about DeLuca Industries, pictures from charity events, mentions in the society pages. I realized you weren't just wealthy, you were connected, powerful in ways I didn't fully understand. And that scared you." Isabella nodded. "The more I learned about your family, your business, the more I realized how different our worlds were. I was a server from Little Italy, who could barely make rent. You are Alessandro DeLuca. It seemed impossible that you would want anything to do with an accidental pregnancy from a one-night stand." End quote. Alessandro's expression darkened. "It wasn't just a one-night stand. At least, it wasn't for me." Isabella felt her cheeks flush as memories of that night flooded back. The way Alessandro had looked at her across the crowded ballroom, the intensity in his eyes when he asked her to dance, the hours they had spent talking in his apartment before passion overtook them both. It hadn't felt casual or meaningless, but Isabella had convinced herself that for a man like Alessandro, such encounters were probably routine. "I didn't know that," she admitted. I assumed it was just another night for you." "It wasn't." Alessandro's voice was quiet but firm. "I looked for you after that night. I went back to the hotel, asked about you, tried to find out who you were. But you had given them a fake name. Isabella's heart clenched. I had to. Servers weren't supposed to fraternize with guests. I would have lost my job if anyone found out. So instead I lost any chance of finding you. Alessandro leaned back in his chair, studying Isabella with those penetrating green eyes. Continue with your story. Tell me about Sophia's birth. Isabella shifted Sophia to a more comfortable position, the baby now sleeping peacefully despite the tension surrounding her. The pregnancy was difficult. I was alone, scared, working as much as I could to save money for the hospital bills. I had no insurance, no family support. She described the long hours spent cleaning office buildings at night, the way her back ached as her pregnancy progressed, the fear that had consumed her as her due date approached, and she still had no clear plan for how to raise a child on her own. When I went into labor, I was terrified, Isabella continued, her voice growing thick with emotion. I had no one to call, no one to drive me to the hospital. I took a taxi and went through 16 hours of labor completely alone. Alessandro's hands clenched into fists on the table. 16 hours? Were there complications? Sophia was breech. They had to do an emergency C-section in the end. I remember lying on that table, about to have major surgery, and the only person I could think of was you. I wished desperately that you were there with me. Isabella saw Alessandro swallow hard, his composure cracking as he imagined the scene she described. She could see him trying to reconcile this story with his anger, struggling with the knowledge that she had suffered through one of the most important moments in both their lives, completely alone. After Sophia was born, the hospital bills were enormous, more than I could ever hope to pay. I was recovering from surgery, unable to work, watching my savings disappear, while trying to figure out how to support a newborn baby. Isabella paused, gathering courage for the next part of her story. That's when I met Marco. Alessandro's expression immediately hardened again. How? He was at the hospital visiting a friend who had been in a car accident. Sophia and I were in the pediatric wing because she had developed jaundice and needed to stay under the lights. Marco saw me crying in the hallway after I got another bill I couldn't pay, and he was kind to me. Isabella remembered that moment with painful clarity, the way Marco had approached her with gentle concern, offering tissues and a sympathetic ear. She had been at her lowest point, exhausted and overwhelmed, and terrified of the future, and his kindness had been like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. He helped with the hospital bills, Isabella continued, watching Alessandro's face grow darker with each word. He said he understood what it was like to struggle, that he wanted to help a young mother get back on her feet. I thought he was just being charitable. But he wasn't. Isabella shook her head. He was interested in me, romantically. He started visiting us regularly, bringing gifts for Sophia, taking us out to dinner. He was everything I thought I needed, stable, kind, ready to be a father to another man's child. So you let him believe Sophia was his daughter? Isabella nodded miserably. When he asked about Sophia's father, I panicked. I told him it was a brief relationship with someone who had left the country. I made up a story about a man named Roberto, who had returned to Italy before he knew about the pregnancy. Marco was so understanding, so willing to step into that role, that it seemed like the perfect solution. Alessandro's laugh was cold and bitter. Perfect for everyone except the child's actual father, who remained completely in the dark. I told myself it was temporary, Isabella said desperately. I thought eventually I would find the courage to tell you the truth, or that somehow the situation would resolve itself. But as time went on, it became harder and harder to imagine destroying the life Marco and Sophia had built together. The life built on lies. Isabella couldn't argue with that assessment. She had watched Marco fall in love with Sophia, had seen the genuine joy on his face when the baby took her first steps, said her first words, reached for him when she was frightened or tired. The bond between them had been real and beautiful, even if its foundation was completely false. When Marco proposed, Isabella continued, her voice barely audible, I knew I had to make a choice. I could marry him and let Sophia grow up believing he was her father, giving her the stable family life I had always wanted for her. Or I could tell the truth and risk destroying everything we had built. Alessandro leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. And you chose the lie. I chose what I thought was best for Sofia, Isabella corrected, though her voice lacked conviction. Marco was offering us everything I couldn't provide on my own. Security, stability, a loving father figure. It seems selfish to disrupt that for the sake of my own guilt. But you didn't marry him. Isabella shook her head, remembering the night she had called off their engagement just weeks before the wedding. I couldn't go through with it. I realized that marrying Marco while keeping such an enormous secret would be unfair to everyone involved. I told him I needed more time, that I wasn't ready for marriage yet. And he accepted that? He was disappointed, but he said he would wait. He still wanted to be part of Sofia's life, still wanted to help raise her. So we continued as we were, with him believing he was her father, and me trying to convince myself that someday I would find the courage to tell him the truth. Alessandro absorbed this information in silence, his expression unreadable. Isabella could see him processing every detail, probably calculating the implications of each decision she had made, and finding new reasons to be angry with her. What changed? Alessandro asked finally. Why are you here now, in this house, working as a nanny for your own child? Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. This was the part of the story she was most ashamed of, the series of events that had led to the impossible situation they now found themselves in. 3 months ago, I met someone at Tebelana, my new job, a journalist who was investigating the DeLuca family for a story about organized crime in Chicago. Alessandro's entire body went rigid. What journalist? David Rodriguez from the Tribune. He was trying to connect Marco to illegal activities, looking for evidence of money laundering through his legitimate businesses. When he found out about my relationship with Marco, about Sofia, he started asking questions. Isabella watched Alessandro's face transform into something truly frightening. All traces of the conflicted father disappearing behind the cold mask of a man who had built his empire on the ability to eliminate threats. The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop several degrees. What kind of questions? About Marco's finances, about how he could afford such an expensive lifestyle on his legitimate income, about Sofia's paternity, whether Marco was really her father, or if there was some other explanation for why he was supporting us. Isabella's voice shook as she continued. Rodriguez had done his research. He knew about the charity gala, where you and I met, had somehow connected me to that event. He started implying that maybe Sofia wasn't Marco's daughter at all. Alessandro stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp and violent in the quiet kitchen. Are you telling me that this journalist knows about Sofia's real parentage? I don't think so, not for certain. But he was getting close. Too close. He offered me money for information about the DeLuca family, threatened to publish what he suspected if I didn't cooperate. Isabella clutched Sofia tighter, her maternal instincts responding to the danger radiating from Alessandro. I panicked. I quit my job, broke things off with Marco, and tried to disappear with Sofia. Tried to disappear. Alessandro's voice was deadly quiet. But you're here instead. Isabella nodded miserably. I didn't have anywhere else to go. No money, no support system, no way to care for Sofia on my own. When I saw the job listing for a nanny position with the DeLuca family, it seemed like a sign. I thought I could work here temporarily, earn enough money to start over somewhere else with Sofia. You thought you could hide in plain sight. I thought I could buy time to figure out a better plan. I never expected you to be here, never thought you would recognize Sofia so quickly. Isabella looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. I should have known she would have your eyes. Alessandro began to pace the kitchen, his movements controlled but predatory. Isabella could practically see his mind working, processing the threats to his family, calculating responses to each potential danger. When he finally stopped and looked at her again, his expression was unreadable. This journalist, Rodriguez. What exactly does he know? Isabella tried to remember every detail of her conversations with the reporter, every question he had asked, and every piece of information he seemed to already possess. He knows about the charity gala, knows I was working there the night we met. He knows about my relationship with Marco, and about Sofia. He suspects there's more to the story than what's publicly known. but I don't think he has proof of anything specific. Yet, Alessandro's tone was grim. Men like Rodriguez don't give up easily. If he's investigating my family, he won't stop until he finds something useful, or until he's made to stop. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine at the implication in Alessandro's words. She had heard the stories about what happened to people who posed a threat to the DeLuca family, though she had always hoped they were exaggerated. Looking at Alessandro now, at the cold calculation in his green eyes, she began to fear that the stories weren't nearly dramatic enough. I never told him anything, Isabella said quickly. I refused his offers, didn't cooperate with his investigation. I just wanted to get away from the whole situation. But instead, you brought the situation directly into my home. Alessandro stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare that made her blood freeze. You put my daughter, my family, at risk because you were too much of a coward to tell the truth when it mattered. Isabella felt tears beginning to gather in her eyes, but she forced them back. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences, no matter how terrifying they might be. I know I've made terrible mistakes. I know I've hurt people I care about and put Sophia in danger. But I've only ever wanted to protect her. Protect her? Alessandro's voice rose slightly, causing Sophia to stir in her sleep. You've painted a target on her back. Do you have any idea what men like Rodriguez are capable of? What they'll do to get a story that could destroy my family? Isabella had been so focused on the immediate dangers of Alessandro's world, the violence and crime that seemed to surround the DeLuca name, that she hadn't fully considered the threats that came from outside it. Journalists seeking to expose the family's secrets, law enforcement agencies looking for leverage, rival families searching for weaknesses to crack, exploit. Sophia's existence, her connection to Alessandro, made her valuable to anyone who wanted to hurt the DeLuca empire. I didn't think, Isabella whispered. I was so scared of your world that I didn't realize I was making things worse by trying to avoid it. Alessandro stared at her for a long moment, and Isabella could see him struggling with conflicting emotions. The anger was still there, burning bright and justified. But underneath it, she caught glimpses of something else. Pain, perhaps, or disappointment that ran deeper than simple betrayal. You were never just avoiding my world, Alessandro said quietly. You were avoiding me. You made assumptions about who I am, what I would want, how I would react to learning I had a daughter. You never gave me the chance to prove those assumptions wrong. Isabella felt the truth of his words like a physical blow. She had been so certain that a man like Alessandro DeLuca would have no interest in an unplanned child with a woman from a completely different social class, that she had never even considered alternatives. She had projected her own fears and insecurities onto him, creating a narrative where he was the villain rather than simply a man who deserved to know he had become a father. You're right, Isabella admitted, her voice breaking. I was a coward. I was so afraid of being rejected, of having Sophia rejected, that I convinced myself I was protecting her when I was really protecting myself. Alessandro studied her face, searching for something she wasn't sure she could provide. And what about now? Are you still trying to protect yourself? Or are you finally ready to put Sophia's needs first? Isabella looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the storm of emotion and recrimination swirling around her. Sophia deserved better than a mother who made decisions based on fear, better than a life built on lies and half-truths. She deserved to know her father, to grow up understanding where she came from and who she really was. What do you want from me? Isabella asked quietly. I want the truth. All of it. I want to know everything about my daughter, everything I've missed, everything you've kept from me. Alessandro's voice was steady but intense. And I want you to understand that Sophia's safety, her future, is now my responsibility, not yours alone. Isabella felt a flutter of panic at the implication. Are you saying you want to take her away from me? I'm saying that everything changes now. Sophia is a DeLuca, and DeLucas are protected in ways you can't imagine. But that protection comes with a price, and part of that price is accepting that her life will never be normal in the way you wanted it to be. Isabella tried to process what Alessandro was telling her, tried to understand what life would look like for Sophia now that her true parentage had been revealed. Would she be surrounded by bodyguards, educated in craft, private schools, raised to understand the complex world her father inhabited? Would there still be room in that life for the woman who had given birth to her? I want to be part of her life, Isabella said desperately. She's my daughter too. Yes, she is. Alessandro's expression softened slightly. And despite everything you've done, despite all the lies and deception, I can see that you love her. That matters. Relief flooded through Isabella, though she could see from Alessandro's expression that his acknowledgement came with conditions she might not like. But things will be different now, Alessandro continued. Sofia's safety is paramount, which means your journalist friend Rodriguez becomes my problem to solve. It means Sofia will be protected by my security team, raised with an understanding of who she is and where she comes from. And it means you and I will need to find a way to work together for her sake, regardless of our personal feelings. Isabella nodded, though the prospect of navigating a co-parenting relationship with Alessandro DeLuca seemed almost as daunting as the threats they faced from the outside world. What do you want me to do? For Kra. Now, stay here. Sofia knows you, trusts you, and disrupting her routine further would only cause her unnecessary stress. Alessandro paused, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. But understand that this house, this family, operates by different rules than what you're used to. If you're going to be part of Sofia's life, you need to be prepared for what that means. Isabella wasn't entirely sure what Alessandro was warning her about, but she nodded anyway. She had already lost 2 years of being honest about Sofia's parentage. She wasn't going to risk losing more time with her daughter now. There's something else, Alessandro said, his tone becoming more businesslike. Marco will need time to adjust to this new reality, but he's not going to simply disappear from Sofia's life. He's been her father figure for 2 years, and that bond matters. We'll need to figure out how to handle that situation delicately. Isabella felt her heart clench as she thought about Marco, about the pain and betrayal she had seen in his eyes when the truth was revealed. He's been so good to her, so good to both of us. I never wanted to hurt him. But you did hurt him. We both did, in different ways. Alessandro's voice carried a note of regret. Marco thought he had found a family, thought he was building a future with you and Sofia. Learning that it was all based on a lie, that's going to take time for him to process. Isabella wondered if Marco would ever be able to forgive her. If there was any way to salvage some kind of relationship that would allow him to remain in Sofia's life without the constant reminder of how thoroughly he had been deceived. The thought that her choices might cost Sofia the loving relationship she had built with Marco was almost unbearable. I should talk to him, Isabella said. Try to explain, to apologize. Not tonight. Marco needs space to deal with this revelation. Pushing him too hard, too fast, will only make things worse. Alessandro glanced at Sofia, who was beginning to wake up and make soft, sleepy sounds. Right now, our priority needs to be Sofia and making sure she feels secure despite all the upheaval around her. Isabella realized Alessandro was right. Sofia was too young to understand what was happening. But she was certainly old enough to pick up on the tension and emotional chaos that had erupted around her. The most important thing was maintaining some sense of normalcy and routine, while the adults figured out how to navigate this new reality. She'll need dinner soon, Isabella said, looking at the clock on the kitchen wall, and then her bath and bedtime routine. Show me. Alessandro's request was simple but loaded with meaning. Show me how to take care of my daughter. Isabella felt something shift in her chest as she realized that Alessandro wasn't just demanding his parental rights. He was genuinely asking to learn about Sofia's needs and preferences. Despite his anger and the intimidating power he wielded in his professional life, he was approaching fatherhood with a humility that surprised her. She likes her food warm but not hot, Isabella began, standing up with Sofia in her arms. And she's gotten picky about textures lately. Smooth purees are fine, but anything with lumps makes her gag. Alessandro followed her to the cabinet where Sofia's baby food was stored, watching intently as Isabella explained each step of the feeding process. His attention to detail was remarkable. The same focus he probably brought to running his business empire, now directed toward understanding his daughter's needs. She has your stubborn streak, Isabella found herself saying as she prepared Sofia's dinner. When she doesn't want something, she makes it very clear. Alessandro smiled slightly. The first genuine expression of warmth Isabella had seen from him since he had walked into the nursery. What else? What other parts of her personality remind you of me? Isabella could hear the hunger in his voice, the desperate need to understand this child he had missed so much of. She thought about all the little moments over the past 2 years, when she had seen Alessandro and Sophia's expressions, her mannerisms, her emerging personality. She's incredibly determined. When she wants something, she doesn't give up until she gets it. And she's observant, always watching everything that happens around her, like she's trying to figure out how the world works. Isabella smiled as Sophia reached for her bottle with both hands. She's also charming when she wants to be. She has this smile that can get her anything she wants. That sounds familiar. Alessandro's tone was dry, but Isabella could see the pride in his eyes as he watched Sophia eat. They fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine as Isabella guided Alessandro through Sophia's evening care. He proved to Tapper, be a quick learner, absorbing every detail about bath time, bedtime stories, and the specific way Sophia liked to be rocked before sleep. Isabella found herself relaxing slightly as she watched him interact with their daughter, seeing glimpses of the gentleness she remembered from their night together beneath his intimidating exterior. "She's beautiful," Alessandro said softly as he tucked Sophia into her crib, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he adjusted her blanket. "Perfect." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes as she watched father and daughter together, finally seeing the scene she had imagined countless times but never thought would actually happen. "She is perfect. She's the best thing I've ever done." Alessandro looked at her across the crib, and for a moment the anger and recrimination faded from his expression. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for taking care of her, for keeping her safe, for loving her even when you were alone and scared. Whatever mistakes she made, you've been a good mother to her." Isabella felt something crack open in her chest at his words, the acknowledgement she had never expected but desperately needed. "I tried to do what was best for her." "I know you did." Alessandro's voice was still soft, but it carried an undertone of steel. "But from now on, you won't have to do it alone." There was a promise in those words, but also a warning. Isabella understood that accepting Alessandro's help meant accepting his authority, his rules, his way of protecting the people he considered family. It meant stepping fully into the world she had spent 2 years trying to avoid. "What happens tomorrow?" Isabella asked as they left the nursery. Sophia finally settled for the night. "Tomorrow we start figuring out how to be a family," Alessandro replied, "and we start dealing with the threats that come with that." Isabella nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what either of those things would look like in practice. As they walked down the hallway toward the main staircase, she caught sight of Marco through an open doorway, sitting alone in what appeared to be a study or library, a glass of whiskey in his hand and an expression of profound loss on his face. Alessandro noticed her gaze and followed it. To his brother. "He'll come around," Alessandro said quietly. "Marco's a good man, even if he's hurting right now. But it's going to take time." Isabella hoped Alessandro was right, hoped that eventually Marco would be able to forgive her enough to maintain some kind of relationship with Sophia. The alternative, that her lies would cost Sophia the loving bond she had formed with the man she had known as her father, was too painful to contemplate. "Where will I sleep tonight?" Isabella asked as they reached the main floor of the mansion. Alessandro paused, and Isabella could see him calculating the implications of various arrangements. "There's a guest room connected to the nursery. You'll stay there, at least for now. Sophia will need consistency while we work through this situation." Isabella nodded, grateful that she wouldn't be separated from Sophia overnight. The baby had never spent a night away from her, and the stress of the day's revelations was already enough disruption to her routine. "Isabella." Alessandro's voice stopped her as she turned toward the stairs. "The journalist, Rodriguez. I'll need you to tell me everything about your interactions with him. Every question he asked, every piece of information he seemed to already know, every threat he made. Can you do that?" Isabella felt a chill run down her spine at the intensity in Alessandro's voice. "Yes. I can remember everything." "Good. We'll talk about it tomorrow." after you've had time to rest and think clearly." Alessandro's expression was unreadable, but Isabella could sense the wheels turning in his mind, plans being formed to deal with the threat Rodriguez represented. "For now, get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day." Isabella climbed the stairs to the guest room, her mind reeling from everything that had happened in the space of a few hours. This morning, she had been a nanny caring for a child she secretly knew was her own. Tonight, she was living in the home of Sophia's father, the man whose world she had spent 2 years trying to avoid. The guest room was elegant and comfortable, with a connecting door to the nursery that would allow her to hear if Sophia needed her during the night. Isabella changed into the spare clothes she kept in her bag, then sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the magnitude of what had changed. Sophia was safe, at least for now. She was with her real father, who clearly wanted to be part of her life, despite the deception that had kept them apart. Alessandro was angry, and rightfully so, but he wasn't the monster Isabella had feared he might be. If anything, seeing him with Sophia had revealed a gentleness and capacity for love that surprised her. But the dangers they faced were real and immediate. The journalist Rodriguez represented a threat not just to Alessandro and his family, but to Sophia as well. And Isabella had no illusions about what Alessandro might do to eliminate that threat. She had seen the cold calculation in his eyes when she mentioned Rodriguez's investigation, had heard the implication in his voice when he talked about making threats stop. Isabella lay down on the unfamiliar bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the soft sounds of Sophia sleeping in the next room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new consequences for the choices she had made over the past 2 years. But tonight, for the first time since Sophia was born, Isabella wasn't alone in carrying the weight of protecting her daughter. She just hoped that accepting Alessandro's help wouldn't cost more than she was prepared to pay. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching Isabella's mood as she woke to the sound of Sophia's cheerful babbling from the nursery. Despite everything that had happened the day before, Sophia seemed remarkably unaffected by the emotional upheaval around her, greeting the new day with her usual sunny disposition. Isabella found Alessandro already in the kitchen when she came down with Sophia for breakfast, dressed in a crisp business suit and reading what appeared to be financial reports, while drinking espresso from a delicate china cup. He looked up when they entered, his expression unreadable, but his eyes immediately focusing on Sophia, with an intensity that made Isabella's chest tighten. "Good morning," Isabella said carefully, settling Sophia into the high chair that had appeared overnight. "Did you sleep well?" "I don't sleep much anyway," Alessandro replied, which Isabella suspected was probably true given the nature of his business. "Mrs. Romano left fresh fruit and oatmeal for Sophia, and there's coffee if you want some." Isabella accepted the coffee gratefully, needing the caffeine to face whatever this day would bring. As she prepared Sophia's breakfast, she was aware of Alessandro watching every movement, filing away information about his daughter's preferences and routines. "She wakes up happy," Alessandro observed, as Sophia clapped her hands and made excited noises at the sight of her food. "Always. She's been that way since she was born. Even when she was colicky as a newborn, she would still smile when she first woke up." Isabella found herself relaxing slightly as they fell into conversation about Sophia. This, at least, was safe ground. "Tell me about when she was born," Alessandro said quietly. "About the first time you held her." Isabella paused, spoon halfway to Sophia's mouth, as memories of that overwhelming moment flooded back. "It was the most terrifying and amazing moment of my life. She was so small, so perfect, and I was so scared that I wouldn't know how to take care of her. But when they put her in my arms, it was like everything clicked into place." Alessandro's expression softened as he listened, and Isabella could see him trying to imagine that moment, trying to picture the daughter he had never seen as a newborn. What did she look like? Wrinkled and red, absolutely beautiful. She had a full head of dark hair that stuck up in all directions, and when she opened her eyes for the first time, Isabella looked at Alessandro meaningfully. "There was no question whose daughter she was. But you still didn't tell me." The accusation hung between them, tempering the moment of connection with a reminder of the deception that had brought them to this point. Isabella felt the familiar weight of guilt settle on her shoulders as she continued feeding Sophia. I was 18 years old, alone in a hospital room with a newborn baby and medical bills I couldn't pay, Isabella said quietly. I was terrified and overwhelmed and had no idea how to contact you even if I had wanted to. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but it was a decision you made, and every day after that, you chose to maintain the lie. Isabella couldn't argue with that assessment. Every birthday, every milestone, every moment of joy and worry and pride, she had chosen to experience alone, rather than share with the man who had as much right to those moments as she did. I know, Isabella admitted. And I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't begin to make up for what I've taken from you. But I am sorry, Alessandro, more than you'll ever know. Alessandro studied her face for a long moment, and Isabella could see him weighing her words against his anger, trying to find a path forward that would serve Sophia's best interests, rather than simply satisfying his desire for revenge. We can't change the past, Alessandro said finally. But we can control what happens from now on, and that starts with dealing with Rodriguez. Isabella felt her stomach clench with anxiety. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing that everything she told Alessandro about the journalist would likely determine the man's fate. What do you want to know? Everything. Start from the beginning. Isabella took a deep breath and began to recount her interactions with David Rodriguez, from their first encounter at her workplace to his increasingly aggressive attempts to get information about the DeLuca family. Alessandro listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details, his expression growing darker with each revelation. He showed you photographs? Alessandro's voice was deadly quiet when Isabella described Rodriguez's evidence of her presence at the charity gala. Pictures of me serving drinks at the event. Pictures of you and me dancing. Isabella's cheeks flushed as she remembered the images Rodriguez had produced. He said he had been investigating the DeLuca family for months, tracking their charitable donations and social connections. And he specifically asked about Sophia's paternity? Isabella nodded. He said the timing was suspicious, that Marco's sudden interest in supporting a single mother coincided with some large cash withdrawals from his business accounts. He implied that maybe Marco was being blackmailed, or that there was some other explanation for his generosity. Alessandro's jaw clenched as he processed this information. Isabella could practically see his mind working, calculating the extent of Rodriguez's knowledge and the threat he represented to the family. Did he record your conversations? Take notes? I don't think so. At least, I never saw him with recording equipment. But he seemed to remember everything we talked about with perfect clarity. Isabella paused, remembering Rodriguez's intense focus during their meetings. He was very good at his job. Alessandro's tone made Isabella's blood run cold. Alessandro, please. I know Rodriguez was asking dangerous questions, but he's just a journalist doing his job. He doesn't deserve to. Isabella couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice what she feared Alessandro might do to eliminate the threat Rodriguez represented. He doesn't deserve to what? Alessandro's green eyes were like chips of ice. To face the consequences of threatening my family, of putting my daughter at risk? He doesn't even know Sophia is your daughter. Yet. But men like Rodriguez don't stop digging until they find something they can use. And now that you're living in my house, caring for Sophia under my roof, how long do you think it will take him to put the pieces together? Isabella felt sick as she realized Alessandro was right. Rodriguez was smart and persistent, and her sudden disappearance from her previous life would only confirm his suspicions that there was more to the story. If he was really investigating the DeLuca family, he would eventually connect her presence in Alessandro's household to Sophia's parentage. What are you going to do? Isabella asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. What I have to do to protect my family. Alessandro's expression was implacable. Rodriguez made his choice when he decided to threaten the people I care about. Now, he has to live with the consequences. Isabella looked down at Sophia, who was happily smearing oatmeal across her high-chair tray, blissfully unaware that her existence had just condemned a man to whatever punishment Alessandro deemed appropriate. The contrast between Sophia's innocent joy and the cold calculation in her father's voice was almost surreal. "There has to be another way," Isabella said desperately. "Some way to handle this without what? Without violence?" Alessandro's smile was sharp and humorless. "You still don't understand what world you stepped into, do you? You still think there are nice, clean solutions to messy problems?" Isabella met his gaze directly, seeing both the man who had been gentle with his daughter and the one whose reputation made grown men cross themselves when his name was mentioned. "I understand that violence creates more problems than it solves. What happens when Rodriguez disappears? Don't you think his newspaper will investigate? Don't you think they'll connect his disappearance to his investigation of your family?" Alessandro's expression shifted slightly, and Isabella could see that he was at least considering her arguments. "You're assuming Rodriguez was working alone, that he shared his suspicions with his editors. Men like him often keep their best leads to themselves until they have enough evidence to publish. But you don't know that for certain. And if you're wrong, if he has told other people about his investigation, then eliminating him only confirms that he was on the right track." Isabella could see Alessandro weighing her words, his strategic mind calculating risks and benefits. She pressed her advantage, hoping to appeal to his intelligence rather than his emotions. What if there was a way to discredit him instead, to make him look unreliable, to cast doubt on anything he might publish about your family? "What are you suggesting?" Isabella wasn't entirely sure, but she knew she had to offer some alternative to whatever violent solution Alessandro was contemplating. "Rodriguez is ambitious, right? Looking for a big story that will make his career? What if you gave him something bigger to focus on, something that would make him forget about the DeLuca family entirely?" Alessandro raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "I don't know. But you have resources, connections, information that other people would kill for. Surely there's someone else Rodriguez could investigate. Some other story that would be more valuable than whatever he thinks he can prove about your family." End quote. Isabella could see Alessandro considering this possibility, his expression thoughtful rather than coldly furious. She held her breath, hoping that his strategic instincts would override his protective rage. "It's possible," Alessandro admitted slowly. "Rodriguez has been investigating several crime families in the city, not just ours. If he suddenly received credible information about one of our competitors, and he would follow the better story," Isabella finished. "Especially if it came with more concrete evidence than whatever suspicions he has about you." Alessandro nodded slowly, and Isabella felt a surge of relief that he was at least considering nonviolent alternatives. It would need to be handled carefully. Rodriguez would have to believe he discovered the information on his own, that it wasn't planted by someone trying to distract him. But it's possible? It's possible. It's possible. Alessandro looked at Isabella with something that might have been approval. "You're more strategic than I gave you credit for." Isabella felt a flush of pride at the compliment, even as she reminded herself that she was essentially helping Alessandro manipulate a journalist's investigation. "I just want Sofia to be safe, and I want that safety to come without destroying innocent people." "Rodriguez isn't innocent," Alessandro corrected. "He chose to investigate my family, chose to threaten the people I care about. But you're right that there are more elegant solutions than the obvious ones." Isabella felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, as Alessandro seemed to embrace the idea of misdirection rather than violence. "How long would something like that take to arrange?" "Not long. I have people who specialize in providing journalists with exactly the kind of information they're looking for." Alessandro's smile was predatory. "By the end of the week, Rodriguez will be so busy chasing his new lead that he'll forget the DeLuca family ever interested him." Isabella nodded, hoping Alessandro was right, and that this solution would truly eliminate the threat Rodriguez represented. As she finished feeding Sofia and cleaned up the breakfast dishes, she tried not to think too hard about what kind of information Alessandro might provide to distract the journalist, or what the consequences might be for whoever became Rodriguez's new target. "There's something else we need to discuss," Alessandro said, as Isabella lifted Sofia from her high chair. "The DNA test." Isabella had been expecting this, but it still made her stomach clench with anxiety. "When?" "This afternoon. I've arranged for a private lab to come to the house, completely confidential. The results should be available within 24 hours. Isabella nodded, though she knew the test was just a formality. There was no question about Sofia's parentage, not with those distinctive green eyes staring back at Alessandro every time he looked at his daughter. And after that? After that, we make this official. Sofia becomes legally recognized as my daughter, with all the protections and privileges that entails. Isabella felt a mix of relief and anxiety at this prospect. Legal recognition would provide Sofia with security and financial stability beyond anything Isabella could have given her alone. But it also meant irrevocably tying Sofia to the DeLuca name and everything that came with it. What about custody? Isabella asked quietly. Alessandro's expression softened slightly. You're her mother, Isabella. Despite everything that's happened between us, I would never try to take her away from you completely. But there will need to be legal agreements, formal arrangements that protect everyone's rights and interests. Isabella nodded, knowing that she had no choice but to accept whatever terms Alessandro offered. She had spent 2 years keeping Sofia's existence secret, forfeiting any legal protections she might have had. Now she was entirely dependent on Alessandro's goodwill and his recognition of her role in Sofia's life. I want what's best for Sofia, Isabella said firmly. Whatever arrangements we make, they have to put her needs first. On that, we agree completely. Alessandro reached out and touched Sofia's cheek gently, his expression transforming as he looked at his daughter. She deserves everything I can give her. The best education, the best opportunities, the best protection. Isabella felt a complex mix of emotions as she watched Alessandro with Sofia. Pride that their daughter would have every advantage money and power could provide, anxiety about what those advantages might cost, and a deep, aching love for the man whose gentle touch with their child reminded her why she had been unable to forget him despite everything. I should call my family, Isabella said, realizing that her mother and siblings would be worried about her sudden disappearance from her previous job. They'll be wondering where I am. Alessandro nodded. Of course. But Isabella? His voice carried a warning note. Be careful what you tell them. The fewer people who know about Sofia's real parentage, the safer she'll be. Isabella understood the implication. The more people who knew about Sofia's connection to Alessandro, the more potential targets there were for anyone seeking to harm the DeLuca family. Her own family would have to remain in the dark, at least for now. I'll be careful, Isabella promised. Over the next few hours, Isabella watched Alessandro transform from the angry, betrayed man of yesterday into something far more complex. He was still furious about her deception, still hurt by the years he had lost with Sofia, but he was also completely devoted to their daughter's well-being. Every decision he made, every plan he formulated, revolved around keeping Sofia safe and giving her the best possible life. When the private medical team arrived that afternoon to conduct the DNA test, Alessandro insisted on holding Sofia throughout the procedure, his presence calming her when the brief blood draw made her cry. Isabella found herself falling a little more in love with him as she watched him comfort their daughter, his large hands so gentle against Sofia's small body. The results will confirm what we already know, Alessandro said afterward, as they sat in the nursery watching Sofia play with her toys. But it will make everything legal, official. Isabella nodded, though she was more focused on the way Alessandro was looking at Sofia, the expression of wonder and possessiveness that crossed his features every time their daughter smiled at him. She likes you, Isabella observed. She's perfect, Alessandro replied, his voice soft with amazement. Absolutely perfect. That evening, Marco finally emerged from his self-imposed isolation to join them for dinner. The meal was tense and awkward, with conversation limited to Sofia's activities and needs. Isabella could see the pain in Marco's eyes every time he looked at the baby he had thought was his daughter, but she also saw the genuine love that remained unchanged, despite the revelation of her true parentage. She's still the same little girl, Marco said quietly, as Sofia babbled happily in her high chair. Still the same person I've loved for 2 years. Yes, she is, Alessandro agreed, his tone careful but not unkind. And you'll always be important to her, Marco. Always be family. Isabella felt tears gather in her eyes as she watched the two brothers navigate this impossible situation with more grace than she had any right to expect. Despite the lies and deception that had brought them to this point, both men were putting Sophia's needs ahead of their own pain. 3 days later, the DNA results arrived, officially confirming what everyone already knew. Sofia DeLuca was Alessandro's daughter, heir to one of Chicago's most powerful families. Isabella signed the custody papers Alessandro's lawyers had prepared, granting him joint legal custody while allowing her to remain Sofia's primary caregiver. Rodriguez took the bait. Alessandro informed her that same evening, satisfaction evident in his voice. He's completely focused on the Romano family now, convinced he's stumbled onto the story of the century. He won't be bothering us again. Isabella felt relief wash over her, knowing that particular threat had been neutralized without the violence she had feared. What happens now? Alessandro looked at her across the elegant living room where they had been discussing the legal arrangements. Now we figure out how to be a family, how to raise Sofia together despite everything that's happened between us. Isabella studied his face, trying to read the emotions behind his controlled expression. Is that what you want? To raise her together? What I want, Alessandro said slowly, is for Sofia to grow up knowing both her parents, feeling loved and secure and protected. What I want is for her to have everything I can give her, including a mother who loves her enough to have sacrificed everything to keep her safe. Isabella felt her breath catch at the underlying meaning in his words. And what about us? What about what happened between us? Alessandro was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her heart race. What happened between us created Sofia. That makes it the most important night of my life, regardless of everything that came after. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes at his words, at the acknowledgement that their brief time together had meant something to him beyond just physical attraction. I never forgot that night, she admitted quietly. I never forgot you. Then maybe, Alessandro said, standing up and moving closer to where she sat, we can find a way to build something real together, something honest this time, based on truth instead of lies. Isabella looked up at him, at the man who had every right to hate her, but was instead offering her a chance at the future she had never dared to hope for. I'd like that, she whispered. Alessandro reached out and touched her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. It won't be easy. There will be challenges, dangers, complications that come with being part of this family. But Sofia deserves parents who love each other as much as they love her. Isabella leaned into his touch, feeling hope bloom in her chest for the first time in years. I love her more than my own life. I know you do, Alessandro said softly. And I love her more than I ever thought possible. The question is whether we can learn to love each other the same way. Isabella looked into his eyes, seeing not the cold Mafia boss the world feared, but the man who had danced with her in a ballroom 3 years ago, who had shown her gentleness and passion and made her believe in fairy tales. I think I already do, she admitted. Alessandro's smile was soft and genuine, transforming his entire face. Then we'll make this work. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, we'll build the family Sofia deserves. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Sofia's cries echoed from the nursery upstairs. Isabella and Alessandro looked at each other and smiled, the sound of their daughter's voice calling them both to the next phase of their lives. Together, our daughter needs us, Alessandro said, offering Isabella his hand. Isabella took it without hesitation, allowing him to pull her to her feet, and lead her toward the stairs. Our daughter, she repeated, loving the sound of those words on her lips. Together, they climbed the stairs to comfort Sofia, to begin the long process of becoming the family they should have been from the beginning. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead that Isabella couldn't even imagine. But for the first time since Sofia was born, Isabella wasn't facing the future alone. She had Alessandro beside her, the man who loved their daughter as fiercely as she did, who was willing to forgive her mistakes and build something beautiful from the ashes of her deception. She had Sofia, healthy and happy, and surrounded by people who would protect her with their lives. And she had hope, real hope, that the three of them could become the family Sofia deserved, bound together by love and truth instead of lies and fear. As they entered the nursery, and Sophia's cries immediately quieted at the sight of both her parents, Isabella knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The nanny who had hidden the truth had become the mother who would help build their future, and the Mafia boss who had discovered his heir had become the father who would love them both without reservation. Their story was just beginning. But Isabella finally believed it would have a happy ending.